Dear friends, welcome to E-Pathshala. I am Dr. Vishal Jadhav, Department of Sociology, Tilak Maharashtra Vidyapith, Pune. Today, we are going to look at a module called Ruling Class, State Power and the Ideology of Class Struggle within the paper on Political Sociology. This module will completely focus on the Marxist understanding of class and of course the ruling class, ideology and the concepts of hegemony and dominance. What does it mean to have a state which is within the capitalist regime? How do we understand the relationships between the different classes within capitalism? What are the power relations? How does the ruling class rule over the citizens? What is meant by hegemony? And most importantly, why is there no movement against the ruling class? Ruling class, state power and the ideology of class struggle. The main focus of Marx's work is the historical study of capitalism. The huge corpus of work produced by Marx and his contemporaries like Engels and Lenin has as its primary focus the exposition of the nature and systematic functioning of the capitalist mode of production. The political agenda of Marxist theorization is more than apparent. It highlights the historic role to be played by the proletarian class, itself a historical product of the capitalist system, in the overthrow of the latter and establishing a socialist society in its place. The objective location of the working class within the capitalist system enables it to bring about not only self-emancipation but a universal liberation of all oppressed classes in society. Therefore, many scholars contend that one of the most important contributions of Marxism is a theory of proletarian revolution, by means of which the working class leads its historic struggle against the world capitalist system. Marx and Engels' own theorization of proletarian revolution is a result of their active participation in the working class movements in Germany and England during the course of the mid-19th century. Intensification of class contradiction within such societies exposed the level of exploitation faced by the working classes and also helped devise different strategies and tactics adopted by the proletariat in the revolutionary struggle against capitalism. Marx's theory of proletariat as the active self-conscious agent of class struggle receives an elaboration in some of his works like Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts, dated mid-1854, where he draws implications from the armed revolt by the workers in Silesia in June 1844. Before that, Marx came up with the well-known work Introduction to the Critique of Hegel's Philosophy, which placed the radically oppressed class of the proletariats at the center of revolutionary politics. Struggle of any kind by the proletariats against systemic exploitation, however so limited, was imbued with the universal essence and political agenda, that is, one of emancipation from the exploit of the capitalist system and formation of a communist society based on a socialization of means of production. Marx's own idea of a revolutionary potential of the proletariat in the course of class struggle found a match in those of Engels, who had studied the Chartist movement in Britain closely and applauded it for its working class agenda. Ideas of Marx and Engels helped to dispel earlier understandings of the role of the proletariat in transformatory politics. The proletariat as the passive element, while the lead was provided by philosophy, betterment in a situation of working class through reformist measures like cooperative schemes, theory of revolutionary conspiracy, which alone could emancipate the workers. These were some of the pre-existent theories before the crucial intervention of Marxists, which accorded a central place to proletariats in socialist transformation of society. Such a conceptualization was not possible without viewing the proletariat class as the main agent of class struggle, as a class with a political consciousness. The organized movement of the working class against organized capital was not born out of any utopia or conspiracy. It was only through a conscious movement that the working classes organized itself into a political struggle against capitalist exploitation. Therefore, it was with the intensification of class struggle that the working class transitioned from being a class in itself to a class for itself, move forward with the goal of revolutionary socialism. Class struggle in advanced capitalist societies was born out of a condition whereby the production was social but appropriation of profit was private. The underlying structural reason giving rise to such a condition was private ownership of means of production. The working classes did not have any stake in the private property, and with intensification of class struggle worked towards abolishment of private property and socializations of means of production. All these ideas Marx and Engels discussed in what became the program of the Communist League amongst workers in England and Belgium, the Communist Manifesto. The socialization of ownership and regulation of means of production as the historic goal before the proletariat could be achieved only by a revolutionary seizure of power by the latter. Therefore, the inevitable end of class struggle in capitalist societies was establishment of dictatorship of the proletariat, which was a prerequisite for transition into a communist society. Intensification of caste struggle results in initiation of political movement by the proletariat class against the exploitation and alienation inherent in capitalist system. The proletariats as a class find origin in the capitalist system itself. Global capitalism brings together a large number of workers for its production and exchange units. It is the mass of workers organized as the industrial armies that develop a common understanding of its source of exploitation as also its strength, transforming thereby into a class for itself, armed with the revolutionary consciousness and organizations to struggle for an end of capitalist exploitation. Moreover, owing to advanced technology and communications within capitalism, workers are able to establish better contacts with each other and unionize various local struggles into a national movement. Therefore, the working class as the historical class to take forward the agenda of socialist transformation owes its origin to capitalist industrialization based on advanced technology, modern forces of production and a complex division of labor. Therefore, it is only in advanced capitalist countries with development of modern forces of production that the revolutionary class of proletariats is born. With intensification of class contradiction within such societies, the proletariats as a class strives to end systemic inequality rooted within capitalism. Bourgeoisie democratic revolution as prerequisite to proletarian class struggle. According to Marxist understanding, it is the class struggle waged by the capitalists that sees first ever mobilization of the working classes. The bourgeoisie middle classes, in their struggle to break the feudal order to achieve certain political ends for themselves, mobilize the working classes to bring about revolutions to democratize society. The result of such bourgeoisie democratic revolutions is the breakdown of feudal order, dawn of liberal constitutionalism based on codification of universal rights, and establishment of a centralized modern state in place of a monarchical rule. In other words, the demise of all pre-existing forms of social relations and political forms that are hindrances for capitalism to develop is ensured by bourgeoisie revolutions, for which purpose the petty bourgeoisie class mobilizes the working classes as well. The new social order begins to get organized around two main classes, that is the capitalists and the proletariats, and with each passing day contradiction between these two classes increase more and more, resulting in further alienation, exploitation and misery for the proletariats. Within a bourgeoisie system, the limited reprise available to the workers is in the form of certain state-initiated reform and welfare measures that claim to ensure better working conditions for the proletariats. The workers are entitled right to collective bargaining through which they can demand better economic and social status in terms of better wages and social security measures. However, the bourgeoisie framework does not address the structural inequality of the capitalist system that sustains on keeping the working classes in a subordinated position. According to the ideology of class struggle, the proletariat class is responsible to make the democratic revolution permanent, that is, to organize themselves for a wider struggle to abolish private property, going beyond its immediate economic demands for better wages and working conditions, to strive to achieve its political end, which is revolutionary overthrow of capitalism. Such radicalization of revolution by the proletariat class entails two things. First, each and every reform measure introduced by the bourgeoisie democrats must be linked with the wider political agenda of the working classes to attack private property. And second, the working classes during the extended course of class struggle must brace themselves to exercise political power. Class struggle waged by the working classes requires that workers organize independently through councils and clubs and train themselves in mass agitation and public propaganda in order to bring out their revolutionary position and program in public domain. Exploitation of the working classes within capitalism is linked to production of surplus. In other words, the rate of profit accumulation for the capitalists is directly proportional to the rate of exploitation of the proletariat class. The global capitalist economy works through abstract concepts that conceal the aspect of direct exploitation of labor, which is the source of all value or profit for the capitalist. Law of value, rate of profit, production and exchange mechanisms, market, etc., are some abstract concepts that are supposed to constitute the economic sphere of society. The fundamental aspect of exploitation of social labor within capitalism is a political issue. The capitalist class is able to extort surplus value from the working classes only because it owns the means of production. At the surface level, bourgeoisie political economy upholds the freedom of each individual, including a worker. Among crucial individual rights are included the right to enter into contracts freely and freedom to sell labor in exchange for an equal amount of wages. Therefore, within the capitalist system, the worker is quote unquote free. In this crucial sense, especially in comparison with bonded or slave labor within feudalism. However, as pointed out by Marxists, labor within capitalism is free also in another sense, that is, a characteristic feature of capitalist social order is a disunity between the direct producer and the means of production. This implies that a worker, on being hired by the capitalist for a certain work, does not sell a particular amount of labor for fixed amount of time. Rather, the capitalist buys the worker's capacity to labor, that is, labor power, which then translates into profit for the former. The bourgeoisie political economy manages to depoliticize the question of exploitation of workers within capitalism by restricting it to the sphere of economy. The ideology of liberal democratic rights, especially that of freedom to enter into valid contracts and right to property, serve to separate the organization of capitalist production from the sphere of organized violence. This essentially means that the sphere of production is sanitized from any traces of physical or extra economic violence to extort profit out of the worker. The truth of the statement cannot be denied. However, it also effectively obscures the level of exploitation of labor built into the way production process is organized within capitalism, whereby on one hand the worker produces surplus for the capitalist and on the other reproduces conditions of his own exploitation. The separation of the level economy from that of politics is a characteristic feature of bourgeoisie society dominated by capitalism. The separation between the elements of the political and economy as one of the trademark features of the bourgeois order has implications for the nature of the capitalist state. The state, as the sphere of the public representing general interests of society, is against the civil society or the private sphere of the individuals, where private interests reign supreme. Such a view, according to Marx, is a mystification promoted by the bourgeoisie social order. Such a view serves to delink man's political identity from his concrete material reality, the latter being a determinant factor behind man's social existence. Therefore, as part of Marx's critique of liberal bourgeoisie order, the state as the neutral negotiator between conflicting interests within civil society ends up mystifying the essential nature of capitalist state. This is defined by its primary function as the protector of private property. State as the pure realm of politics is born out of the same class contradiction in society which it seeks to resolve in the first place. In this sense, the neutral position of the state in a capitalist society is a myth. Nature of state in capitalism, the primary view. Marx's analysis of the phenomena of state within capitalist society also precedes by a critique of the Hegelian position on nature of state. The narrative of Marx's life and philosophy as it took shape is said to be marked by a sort of break which represents Marx's metamorphosis into a communist. The time period of the break is said to be around 1844, after which Marx's detachment from Hegelian influence became more pronounced and his transformation into a hardcore materialist was complete. In young Marx, the influence of Hegelian thought was most visible, and the question of state and its relation to society preoccupied most of his earlier works. By 1844, Marx came out with the much celebrated economic and philosophical manuscripts and critiques of Hegelian philosophy of right. With works like these, Marx's views about the nature of capitalist state underwent huge transformation and rested on a thorough critique of the Hegelian thought. It is to be kept in mind that Marx never gave a systematic theory of the state. His conclusions on the nature of the state within capitalism are by nature of derivations from his works like On the Jewish Question, The Class Struggles in France, The Civil War in France, and the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. In his earlier works, Marx endorsed Hegel's view of the state as the custodian of general interests of society. Law was an embodiment of true freedom and represented rationality of man. Hegel viewed the state as the highest ethical moment in which the conflicts of the civil society and those between state and society met their resolution. Therefore, the state represented society's ultimate reality. Earlier writings of Marx bears a Hegelian imprint in that Marx looked at the institution of state as reflecting the moral and political freedom of man. Even when Marx talked about the contradictory of the state's actual behavior, it was seen as a digression from the true essence and purpose of the state. This early position on the state was slowly transformed into one where Marx grew increasingly critical of the abstract way in which Hegel dealt with the state and its institution detached from concrete material reality. The state was determined by the actual concrete circumstances it functioned in, and this led Marx to conclude that the functions of the state represented nothing else but concrete human actions. Therefore, the essence of state was that determined by a concrete material context, and in a society where a sense of profit and accumulation dominated, the state became a mediating force in the existing affairs of the social order, with the primary function of protecting the private interests of the bourgeoisie class. The modern state, born out of bourgeoisie democratic reforms, is lauded by Marx as being the perfect state because it embodies freedom from feudal control and intrusions. The liberal democratic representative state is a symbol of political freedom or emancipation, as Marx wrote in The Holy Family in 1844. However, he also maintained that political emancipation was different from human emancipation, the latter being possible to attain only by abolishing private property and eliminating class inequality in society. The bourgeoisie state was a mere tool, a kind of political superstition, as Marx called it, to foster stable conditions for unrestricted growth of private property. In other words, the modern bourgeoisie state was based on a sense of emancipated slavery, that is, it was bound by rules of private property. Therefore, the dominant or primary view of the state within Marxist-Leninist thought is that the state is reflective of dominant economic relations within society and in capitalist society. The state represents the interests of the bourgeoisie. It acts to proceed and promote private property, in the words of Marx, as he puts it in the Communist Manifesto. The executive of the modern state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie, constituting political power that is merely the organized power of class for oppressing another. Marx's work is important in that it puts stress on the historical process of coming into being of the modern state. The universality, according to the modern form of state, is challenged in the works of Marx. Therefore, the historical phenomena of modern state will come to end with the end of class society. With the dissolution of class contradictions within society, the state, with its origin in contradiction, also comes to an end. Class struggle led by the proletariats results in the constitution of dictatorship of the proletariat, that is the acquisition of political power by the working class, which is an essential condition for bringing about communism. Dictatorship of the proletariat represents rule by the working classes, the majority in society. However, this rule by the majority is different from the modern day representative democracies, which very paradoxically draw legitimacy from the notion of sovereignty of people. Marx accepts that the democratic representative state is the most advanced form of political institution, but at the same time it is inflicted with a class bias. The political rule of the working class en route to communist society, by contrast, symbolizes a classless society where inequity fostered by private property is abolished. Rule of private property can be annihilated only when the working class acquire for themselves the ownership of means of production. There have been contending positions within Marxism whether the Paris Commune of 1871 can be seen as a historical example of the dictatorship of the proletariat. The workers in Paris reacted strongly to the German occupation following defeat of France in Franco-Prussian War in 1871 and organized peaceful resistance against it, with the effect that the German soldiers failed to occupy a major portion of the city. Workers of the city with popular support constituted the Paris Commune, a council composed of workers and soldiers, on March 26, 1871. Subsequent interpretations contend that Marx never thought Paris Commune could qualify as the dictatorship of the proletariat, because the latter could result only after a national socialist revolution. Relative autonomy of the state, the second review. In Marx's work, we find recognition of the fact that in certain historical periods or cases, the state exercises a relative autonomy from dominance of any one social class or classes. It might very well be the case that it is only a certain faction within the ruling class that controls the state, or that the state is run not by the economically dominant class. Internal differentiation or competition between different factions within ruling class makes the state relatively autonomous from being dictated by any specific class, and this might even result in the state taking certain progressive measures in the interest of the working classes. According to Marx, in a historical situations of relative autonomy of the state, the essential nature of the state as a class instrument of the bourgeoisie is not altered, though it may seem otherwise. Marx elaborates on certain historical forms of the state, which, owing to numerous factors, gained autonomy from being dominated by interests of one particular class. The first is the case of the Bonapartist state, which finds exposition in Marx's The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, in 1952. The Bonapartine, which finds exposition in Marx's The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, 1852. The Bonapartist state represented despotic rule of one individual and was seemingly free from hegemony of any one class. The Bonapartist state represented all social classes alike, be it small peasantry, the middle classes, or the bourgeoisie, and yet its actions remained unaffected by the interests of any one of them. Marx maintains that though the Bonapartist state claims to represent the entire society, yet it strengthened the existing social relations. Even if the certain interests of the small peasantry were attended to, it was done without challenging the overall framework of the bourgeois social order. The relative autonomy of the Bonapartist state grew from the fact that neither of the classes, the bourgeoisie or the working class, was in a position to exercise dominance. However, the political independence of the Bonapartist state does not mean it no longer represents the status quo, that is, the interests of the socially and economically dominant class. Marx's view on the Bonapartist state and its relative autonomy has been corroborated by Engels, who, in The Origins of the Family, Private Property and the State, adds that in certain historical periods, the conflicting classes balance each other out according a moment of relative independence to the state. The second instance which Marx talks about is the historical phenomena of Asiatic societies like India and China and even Russia, which he designates a semi-Asiatic state. In Marx's scheme, Asiatic mode of production is one of the successive stages in the onward march of history. Asiatic mode of production is one characterized by lack of private property in land. The feudal social orders of Asiatic societies lack objective conditions for bourgeoisie democratic revolution and therefore are inherently backward. There exists a communal possession of property under the tutelage of the state as the superior landlord. The low level of civilization and the consequent primitiveness of the social order necessitate constant interference of the state, which is the ultimate sovereign in such societies. Therefore, to conclude, according to Marx, the ideas of the ruling class are the dominant ideas and the dominant ideology. And it is through this ideology that the masses are controlled. And therefore, according to Marx, it is the state which influences this ideology and imposes this on the masses. But there are other streams of thought within the Marxist frame which think of relative autonomy, such as Polantas, who believes that it is possible that there could be relative autonomy of the state from the capitalist classes or the ruling classes. This allows for a space, a contested space, wherein different classes can compete for their interests. Thank you.